Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Brigitte Blom from the Prichard Committee will talk about education and schools, and that's coming up shortly. But the current economy means there are those with more than plenty and those who struggle with hunger. God's Pantry Food Bank says the new numbers show the hunger crisis in central and eastern Kentucky has reached an alarming high. Kentucky is listed as the 7th most food insecure in the United States, with some counties experiencing some alarming rates. Questions about the future of federal budget aid is leading to more uncertainty. It all comes as God's Pantry has opened a new facility and has also responded to recent disasters. Joining us to discuss the issues surrounding hunger, God's Pantry President and CEO Michael Halligan. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Bill, good morning. Great to see you again. Thank you for having me on the show.
I always wish we had better news, right? We always have hope, but we have some tough news. Your new numbers show the hunger issue is growing in Kentucky. That is the case around the country, apparently. How tough is the challenge?
The challenge is very tough. We are seeing unprecedented food insecurity. 18.2%, 280,000 people across central and eastern Kentucky, the largest numbers in our history. And 19 of the counties in our service area are amongst the most food insecure in the nation, where 1 in 4 people are missing meals. What
does that look like on a daily basis for people who are facing that struggle?
So, it manifests itself in a variety of different ways. Imagine if you're a child and you get lunch at school and then you don't eat again until the next day at school. You go to bed hungry. You wake up the next morning to take a test or to participate in athletic practice, and you can't concentrate because your stomach is growling. That's what it looks like. Or imagine if you're a senior who is close to retirement, who's lost work, perhaps due to some type of a medical condition, and now they have to make a difficult choice between paying for treatments and medicine or paying for food. That's what hunger looks like in central and eastern Kentucky.
So we have children and older adults in the state experiencing hunger, over 200,000 children, as I understand it. So it knows no age boundaries or geography, really, right?
So one of the conversations that I often have with folks when I'm out in the community is people, individuals, children, veterans, they're one unfortunate, unexpected circumstance away from being thrust into hunger, to being thrust into make a difficult decision about whether to eat or whether to pay for the other necessities of living a healthy life. And oftentimes the choice is not to eat because there are other ways of getting nourishment, and sometimes there's no other ways of getting some of the other things that someone needs to thrive.
And I would imagine sometimes purchasing the lowest quality of food that might be available.
Yeah, so that's often one of the biggest issues that we see is when folks are stretching their budget and they're trying to make ends meet, they're often purchasing foods that are inexpensive, that are empty calories because they get that sensation of not having an empty stomach, but they don't have the nutrition that's necessary to lead an active, healthy lifestyle.
You mentioned kids and waiting for that next meal the next day at school, but how challenging is it here in midsummer when kids are not going to school, where they might get a meal or sometimes 2 a day?
So I think there's a couple ways to think about that. First, for us,
yes,
right? We are seeing unprecedented access, requests for access to food right now. It's tough to keep up. That's how daunting the demand is. And we're blessed with some, amazing financial support, but we're barely making ends meet because of the demands that we face. So if you're that child trying to get food, right, and it's difficult to get to a summer feeding site, or the food that you see at that summer feeding site barely gets by, that's some of the challenge that we face right now because the demands have elevated so much.
people see economic indicators that look pretty good out
do.
there, right? I mean, the stock market has been breaking records. They see other numbers. What other side of the coin is resulting in this situation?
So imagine for a moment if, over the course of your life or over the course of a viewer's life, right, they haven't been able to invest in the stock market. They're making enough money to make ends meet, but they can't invest for the future. You're not participating in that growth in equity. Or imagine if you're not able to buy a home and you rely on rent. You're not able to build equity. So economically, do we see growth? We do. We see growth in asset value. We don't necessarily see growth in well-paying jobs across the Commonwealth.
When you look at the federal budget, and this president and many in Congress say they were elected to cut expenses of the government, what are your concerns about how the final budget may look and may or may not fund hunger relief efforts in the country?
So there's a couple things that I think about. Potential cuts to SNAP. One of the proposals in the Senate bill, in the Senate legislation, which is actually an improvement over what was in the House, so kudos there, but it doesn't go far enough. One of those provisions is that households with children aged 14 and above are subject to work requirements. So if the guardian, mom, dad, grandparent, are not working, those SNAP benefits could be taken away. And now you're talking about a high school age child who's going to miss meals due to a budget debate. I struggle with that piece of the legislation. The estimates across the country, 9.5 billion meals are at risk across the country. Food Bank Network across the country does about 6 billion. Our volume, and God's Pantry Food Bank is part of that network, our distribution volume, if those estimates for SNAP cuts are correct, would have to double overnight.
Michael, as you know, people on the other side of that issue might say there are jobs available, and it is a choice if people are not working to qualify for those benefits.
So if you look at the statistics in aggregate, that's true. But are there jobs where people are? Does someone who's living in eastern Kentucky have to make a decision to move or to drive an hour and a half to 2 hours to get a job in Lexington and then turn around and drive back that night? So a good friend of mine many, many years ago said that you can look at statistics lots of different ways and have those statistics tell the story you'd like to tell. What I hear from people that I talk to is how much they care about where they grew up and how much of a difference they want to make in the local community where they live. And they're trying to find a way to do that. We often talk about how resilient Kentuckians are, right? And the love and the pride that they have for their hometown is part of that resiliency. So how do we help with economic development in all 120 counties versus the ones where it's happening right now? And how do we help individuals avoid having to make difficult decisions on spending money in transportation just to find a job?
You recently opened a new facility.
We did.
To help with your mission, and it's going well?
It's going very well. The staggering fact is, if it wasn't for that facility, we would not be distributing the amount of food that we're distributing right now. We've been in that facility 6 months. We're already exceeding the previous capacity that our old facility offered. Imagine if we weren't in that facility, right? We'd be in a very different position. But that goes back to something I said a few minutes ago. The demands that we are seeing, the access for food that we are being asked to provide, it's staggering. And even though we've got this new facility, we're barely keeping up with that demand. And the resources and the donations that we need to be able to maintain that level of service, they're critically important right now.
You note that people can donate, they can volunteer,
Yep.
they can even host food drives.
Absolutely.
Organize them themselves, right? How can the public help you achieve your goals?
So what I would encourage people to do first and foremost, if you know someone who's experiencing food insecurity, go to our website, enter the zip code in the Find Help section. It's going to bring up the food pantries and the meal programs that are close to where someone lives so they can get the food that they need to lead an active, healthy lifestyle and thrive. If you'd like to make a financial contribution, there's a page on the website for that. Click on the donate button. It's a secure donation. If you'd like to volunteer, there's a page for that. Most importantly, it's not just God's Pantry Food Bank that needs this support. It's every single one of the 500 plus food pantry and meal programs that we support all across central and eastern Kentucky. Think about God's Pantry Food Bank, but think about every single one of those pantries that are in your hometown and make a choice on how you want to help that pantry thrive so that they can help others thrive.
Anything else here in the middle of summer that you have planned or that people should know about?
So we've got a couple different things coming up throughout the course of the summer. I'm going to fast forward all the way to September. September is Hunger Action Month,
okay,
right? I would encourage people to be thinking about what they can do to help make a difference in the lives of someone who's experiencing hunger and prepare for Hunger Action Month in September. There's a whole bunch of other things going on all summer long with volunteer activities and after summer feeding programs and all those kinds of things. You can learn about all of the work that we do on our website by going to godspantryfoodbank.org.
Michael Halligan, thank you for
Bill,
coming
thank you for
from
much for having
God's
me
Pantry. We will be back in just a moment. Brigitte Blom will join us from the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers from WKYT. It's the middle of summer, but school bells will be ringing soon across Kentucky. A new statewide campaign called the Kentucky Effect is kicking off. One of the 20 pilot projects is in Fayette County. The Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence says collaboration among schools, communities, and parents can be tied to success. We'll talk about that and some laws that will impact Kentucky schools this fall. Brigitte Blom is president and CEO of the Prichard Committee, and she joins us. Thanks for coming. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
We have some recent evidence that Kentucky schools are making some progress, some indications they have made up a lot of ground since the pandemic. However, we know that it has not all been made up. Do we have to just keep focus?
We do have to keep focus, absolutely. And you know, the entire nation, arguably the entire globe, is going to deal with for some time coming back from the COVID years when so many kids were learning at home. But Kentucky has done relatively well rebounding from COVID. So we're pleased to see that. We continue to struggle with chronic absenteeism, so getting kids back into school. We're living in a different world where even as adults we want hybrid working environments and are not as open to being back in spaces with others quite so much. Our socialization has changed, and that's certainly true for our young people as well. However, we need them to value being in school and how school serves them. And that's why we believe community school partnerships are so critically important to the success of our young people going forward.
And Kentucky apparently has a national reputation for this collaboration involving schools and communities and parents that hasn't really been recognized. So how do you hope this Kentucky effect, as you call it, will help highlight what's already being done and maybe lead to even more teamwork?
Yeah, you know, Bill, I think we've got our flag behind us on show here, and so united we stand, divided we fall. I think if you look at the successes of Kentucky over many years, generations even, where we have excelled, it's because we've come together. As a state, as still a high poverty state, we've come together to solve our challenges. And so that has to happen in education just like it has to happen in other arenas.
Give us some examples of how that can play out.
So one of the things that we're seeing, it was a big call of ours through the COVID years and coming out of COVID. 8 years ago, we launched something called the Groundswell Initiative. So pre-COVID, saying communities have got to be part of the solution of improving education outcomes. That's how we go from good to great as a state. Our schools can't do it by themselves, 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, 9 months of the year. Our kids need more than that. And so now in the last few years, we've been able to really double down with 20 school districts across the state and 40 schools in supporting their effort to bring community partners to the table so that schools and community partners are leveraging their assets, leveraging their resources to respond to the unique needs of students and families locally. So chronic absenteeism is a great example where community-based organizations can be part of helping young people see that learning is important for them and being part of efforts where they feel a sense of belonging and significance helps them grow and is a place that they appreciate being in. Those things can't happen again in our school buildings by themselves. So community partnerships along with our schools are helping identify solutions to problems that schools were struggling with on their own before.
Can that also mean after-school programs?
Absolutely. It can be after-school programs. It can be access to health care, from vision to dental to physical health. It can be access to mental health care, out-of-school time programs, as you mentioned, summer after-school programs, in the morning school programs. It can also be just the focus on family and community engagement. Is the school really bringing families to the table to understand families' desires for their young people?
Well, how do schools or organizations like yours let parents know that really they are welcome? You know, you see these school board meetings and they get heated and it's like they don't want people there. And so how do we, how do we get everybody rowing in the same direction?
Well, the Prichard Committee does two things to answer that question. And one is our long-standing effort to support parents as leaders in their local community so that they're at those school board meetings as constructive, participatory partners, but also doing things locally, whether it's in their Sunday school classroom or their Girl Scout troop, whatever it might be. They are thinking about how do I support the development and the outcomes for the young people that I interact with. The second way is to encourage our schools to be welcoming of families. And so we started something a few years ago called Family Friendly Schools, and we certify schools as being family friendly, utilizing evidence-based and research-based approaches to engaging families in a meaningful and productive way. So those are two ways, but the Prichard Committee can't do it. We can help support and help create, help encourage the climate at the local level. When that takes hold, schools and communities are finding that it works.
So a family-friendly school is, how do we determine that?
So we actually, an example would be a school in Kentucky that submits a portfolio to the Prichard Committee. Here are the things that we're doing to engage families. It's not just busy work, but it's how are we actually engaging families, say, in a strategic plan for the school? How are we engaging families in the delivery of reading and mathematics? How are we engaging families to honor their experience in how we design education in the school and outside of school as community? They submit that evidence to us, and based on the research and family engagement and family leadership, we're able to certify them as a family-friendly school.
With the U.S. Department of Education being scaled back and money possibly coming straight to the states from Washington in the form of block grants or such, do you believe that can be handled effectively at the state level?
I think it's important that that we're clear what our outcomes for young people are, and that those dollars are utilized in a way, again, that leverages the resources in the community and in the state, not just in our schools, not just in our Department of Education. I mentioned mental health, chronic absenteeism, physical health. Our schools don't need to be the experts in all of those areas. There are partners in each one of our communities who are experts in those areas, and we need to ensure from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint that those partners and their resources are at the table. When it comes to our national approach to education, I think it's important to remember that the Department of Education has existed to drive outcomes across the entire country forward so that we could compete as a country. And so removing or de-emphasizing the Department of Education could in fact result in a de-emphasis of our ability to move forward as a country.
You mentioned programs outside education. I guess a bit of a glancing reference to potential Medicaid cuts as well, which could potentially impact the coverage for children.
For children, also a reduction in SNAP benefits, which are food stamps and food into our schools. Those are things to be concerned about when we think about holistically supporting young people. Also after school time programming. So that's something that we understand is on the chopping block in the current congressional budget. And so those after school programs are where our young people go and are supported after school and out of school in the summertime. We'll need communities to step into that space if those dollars are not coming from the federal government as they are now.
We know we have schools with significant financial challenges. There's a $16 million shortfall in Fayette County, $100 million in Jefferson County. The age-old question, do we spend too much as schools, or are they not funded enough? From a bird's eye view, what is your perspective?
Well, I think we have to recognize that we are not paying teachers a professional wage. I think anybody who has young people considering college, you recognize that if you have a young person who is skilled in mathematics, the sciences, even reading, literature, whatever it might be, going into the teaching profession pays much less than going into most other professions. And so I think we've got to start to reckon with that fact that teachers are not paid a professional wage, and we need to find ways to make teaching more attractive from a salary and a wage standpoint. So that's a piece that we have to recognize is clearly underfunded. The other pieces that I think are important that are lost and part of our community school partnership work is the funding into all the support entities that can help respond to the unique needs of students and families locally. So that's the state's resources into mental health, the state's commitment to public health, which is present in all of our 120 counties, the state's resource into community-based organizations that provide out-of-school time funding. Those are just a few examples. But to think about education spending as just what goes into our P-12 system is missing many of the support, much of the support infrastructure that exists to support better outcomes for students and families.
Did you always see it this holistically, or did you learn this over time on the job?
I don't think we have always seen it this holistically, Bill. We have focused on K-12 funding, adequacy and equity in funding, and that's critically important to maintain when we think about equity between rural districts and urban districts, low wealth property districts and high wealth property districts. So maintaining that equity, which was what was behind the SEEK formula, is critically important. But what we find is that our schools are charged with responding to many, many things that educators were not trained, nor did they opt into the profession to deal with. And those are the things that we hear community members, others start to speak about now, is the lack of additional adults who are supporting young people, the lack of mental health services for young people, social emotional programming. Those are things that young people got from community-based organizations years ago, and those have gone by the wayside. So I think we have to start to recognize, if we want schools to focus on the job of teaching and learning, high quality instruction, we community have got to be at the table with our assets and resources, ensuring that the non-academic needs of students are met.
The Kentucky Student Voice Team, a group of students, has sued over education funding in the state. They at one point were a part of the Prichard committee, right?
That's right.
But you're not associated now.
They spun off as an independent organization about 4 years ago, so they are wholly student-led and an independent organization.
You support their goal, I'm sure, right?
We absolutely support that. Students should make their voice heard as to how they experience education, what they see on the horizon for the future for them. They can see things that we at a certain age can't see because they've grown up in a digital world, in a world where technology is moving so quickly. They've experienced so many challenging issues in our world, from the Great Recession to COVID to 9/11. So they have very different eyes on the future than we have, and we need to pay attention to their voices. So we absolutely yes, support their work.
Some new laws are now in effect that will change some things this fall. DEI initiatives have been eliminated. Does that mean schools won't be allowed to track disparities in education based on race or gender or other categories?
We're clearly seeing a response from those who collect data that is careful about collecting those data. It's important that we continue to understand how we're serving families of all different backgrounds. We collect data routinely and put out a community profile every year for all 171 school districts in the state, which looks at outcomes in reading, in mathematics, in high school graduation. And we look at those outcomes holistically, yes, for all students in the state, but we also look at those outcomes for different subsets of populations in the state. So based on income, based on race and ethnicity, because we need to better understand who we're serving well and where we need targeted approaches to serve all students and families well.
Some busy weeks ahead, right?
Yes, indeed.
Leading up to school and the legislative session,
yes,
before
indeed.
You know it. All right, as always, Brigitte, thanks for coming by. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brigitte Blom from the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence. We'll be back. We'll wrap up Kentucky Newsmakers. We'll have a word about next week's program when we come back. I do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Democratic candidate for Congress Sherilyn Stevenson, one of our scheduled guests next week. Certainly hope you make it a good week ahead. We thank you for joining us for Kentucky Newsmakers.